At 0430 on April 2, 1863, in the Black Waters 40 miles southeast of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, USS Sumter's commanding officer made a decision that would erase 16 months of revolutionary naval engineering from history. The tow line connecting his gunboat to the experimental submarine USS Alligator had been straining against 8-foot swells for 3 hours. Wind speeds exceeded 40 knots. The submarine, riding dangerously low in the water, showed no signs of the crew inside, because there was no crew inside. The Alligator was being towed empty, her 16 hand-crank stations abandoned, her revolutionary airlock sealed, her future mission to Charleston Harbor now entirely dependent on a hemp rope growing heavier with seawater by the minute. The captain ordered the line cut. The USS Alligator, the United States Navy's first submarine, vanished beneath the surface. No wreckage was ever recovered, no debris field ever located. The most innovative vessel in American naval history became a ghost story, swallowed by the same ocean it was designed to conquer. But the Alligator's true story begins 17 months earlier, in a Philadelphia shipyard, where a French engineer named Brutus de Villeroi was attempting to sell the US Navy an idea they didn't know they needed. June 1861, the Union Navy faced an impossible problem. Confederate forces were sinking stone-filled vessels across every major southern harbor entrance, creating artificial barriers called obstructions that blocked Union warships from approaching enemy ports. These underwater barriers sat 8 to 12 feet below the surface, too deep for surface vessels to clear, too shallow to sail over. Traditional naval doctrine had no answer. De Villeroi had already built a submarine, not a prototype or a sketch, an actual functioning underwater vessel. In 1859, he'd constructed a small submersible and used it to salvage cargo from a wrecked schooner in the Delaware River, working at depths of 20 feet for extended periods. When the Navy expressed interest, he invited officers to inspect the craft personally. They watched him submerge, remain underwater for multiple hours, and surface exactly where he'd predicted. The Navy purchased his design for $13,000. By November 1861, construction began at Nefi and Levy Shipyard in Philadelphia. The specifications were unprecedented. The Alligator would measure 47 feet long, 4.5 feet wide at the beam, 6 feet from deck to keel. Her hull would be constructed from 3/16-inch iron plate, reinforced with internal ribs every 18 inches. She would displace 173 tons when surfaced, 230 tons when ballast tanks were flooded for diving. The propulsion system represented the most ambitious element. 16 men, positioned along the central corridor, would operate hand cranks connected through a series of reduction gears to a single 4-bladed propeller at the stern. Mathematical calculations suggested that 16 men working in coordinated rhythm could generate enough sustained power to achieve 4 knots submerged. For comparison, most sailing ships of the era averaged 6 to 8 knots, under favorable wind conditions. 4 knots underwater was revolutionary. But de Villeroi understood that speed meant nothing without endurance. The air supply became his obsession. He installed a compressed air reservoir, a cylindrical tank capable of storing air at 15 pounds per square inch above atmospheric pressure. Leather bellows on deck could pump fresh air into the reservoir while surfaced. When submerged, crew members would crack valves to release compressed air into the interior, replacing oxygen consumed during the dive. De Villeroi calculated that 16 men could remain submerged for 3 hours before CO2 accumulation became dangerous, or up to 5 hours if they minimized physical exertion. The most innovative feature was hidden near the bow. An airlock chamber measuring 4 feet long and 3 feet in diameter, sealed by watertight doors on both ends. The concept was simple. A diver would enter the airlock from inside the submarine, seal the interior door, then flood the chamber by opening external valves. Once pressure equalized with the surrounding water, the exterior door could open, allowing the diver to exit the submarine while it remained submerged. To re-enter, the process reversed. Climb into the airlock, seal the exterior door, pump water out using a hand pump until interior pressure matched the submarine, then open the interior door and step back inside. The purpose was surgical. Confederate harbor obstructions weren't just piles of rocks, They were sunken ships filled with granite ballast, chains stretched between pilings, wooden cribs weighted with iron anchors. These obstructions had to be dismantled piece by piece, underwater, by hand. The Alligator would position herself next to an obstruction, dispatch divers through the airlock, and wait while they attached explosive charges to structural points. After the divers returned, the submarine would retreat to safe distance. The charges would detonate, the obstruction would collapse, Union warships could advance. On May 1, 1862, the USS Alligator was officially commissioned into the United States Navy. She was assigned to the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron under Rear Admiral Samuel Phillips Lee. Her commanding officer would be Lieutenant Thomas O. Selfridge, Jr. Inazitant, age 24, a career naval officer with no submarine experience. Because no American naval officer had submarine experience, nobody did. The Alligator was the first. Initial trials in the Delaware River exposed immediate problems. The hand-crank system, so elegant on paper, proved exhausting in practice. 16 men generating sustained power for hours required extraordinary physical conditioning and precise coordination. If cranking rhythm fell out of sync, the reduction gears would bind. If effort became uneven, the propeller shaft would torque. Early test runs barely achieved 2 knots, not 4. Crews emerged from 30-minute exercises completely spent. Navigation presented worse challenges. The submarine had 4 small portholes, 2 forward, 2 aft, but underwater visibility in murky river water measured mere inches. Compass headings were unreliable. The iron hull created magnetic interference that caused deviation up to 15 degrees. Dead reckoning underwater meant estimating distance based on crank rate and estimated speed, a calculation that compounded errors with every minute submerged. A planned 10-minute underwater transit to a target 200 yards away might end with the submarine surfacing 100 yards off course, in a completely unexpected direction. The airlock performed flawlessly. Divers successfully exited and entered the submerged submarine multiple times. But the practical reality of working in cold, dark water while breathing compressed air created new complications. Divers reported disorientation, difficulty judging depth, and strange euphoric sensations we now recognize as nitrogen narcosis. In 1862, these symptoms had no name and no explanation. They were simply dangers that came with the work. By June, the Navy was ready to deploy the Alligator operationally. The target, Confederate defenses on the James River protecting approaches to Richmond. The mission: navigate upriver submerged, bypass Confederate shore batteries, surface within sight of rebel defensive positions, create panic, then withdraw. No offensive action required. Just presence. Psychological warfare. The operation failed before it began. The James River averaged 7 to 9 feet deep in most sections. The Alligator, even in minimum ballast configuration, required 8 feet of water to operate submerged. She grounded on a sandbar 6 miles from the target area. Attempts to refloat her using kedge anchors and manual hauling failed. A Union tugboat had to extract her under cover of darkness. 3 months of refitting followed. Navy engineers shortened the hull by 7 feet, reducing weight by 17 tons. The hope was that decreased displacement would improve shallow water performance. It did, marginally. But the modifications created new problems. Removing hull sections meant relocating 4 hand-crank stations. The propeller shaft had to be shortened. Gear ratios had to be recalculated. When trials resumed in September, performance was slightly worse than before. Admiral Lee reassigned the Alligator to Charleston Harbor operations. The logic was sound. Charleston's harbor obstructions were well documented, water depths were adequate, and Confederate defenses made traditional naval assault nearly impossible. The Alligator could theoretically approach submerged during darkness, dispatch divers to attach explosives to key obstruction points, then retreat before dawn. If successful, the mission would open Charleston to Union naval bombardment and potential occupation. On March 18, 1863, the submarine departed Hampton Roads under tow by USS Sumter. The plan called for coastal transit to Charleston, approximately 450 miles by sea. Towing a submarine presented unique challenges. The Alligator had almost no freeboard. Waves frequently washed over her deck. She had no engine, no sails, no independent propulsion when surfaced. She was entirely dependent on the towing vessel. If weather deteriorated, there was no option to seek shelter. The submarine went where the towline pulled her. For 2 weeks, conditions remained favorable. Calm seas, light winds, steady progress. Sumter's captain maintained a conservative 6-knot pace to avoid stressing the towline. The Alligator rode low but stable, her ballast tanks partially flooded to maximize stability while maintaining positive buoyancy. On April 1st, weather reports from coastal stations indicated a storm system developing off Cape Hatteras. Wind speeds increasing, seas building, barometric pressure dropping. Sumter's captain faced a decision: continue south and risk worsening conditions, or seek shelter in Beaufort, North Carolina, 40 miles to the northwest. He chose to continue. The Alligator's mission was time-sensitive. Union forces were preparing coordinated operations against Charleston that depended on harbor obstructions being cleared by early April. Delay meant mission failure. By midnight, sustained winds exceeded 35 knots. Swells reached 6 feet. The towline, 2-inch hemp, rated for 4,000 pounds, began showing strain. Water weight on the Alligator increased her effective mass. What started as a 173-ton vessel was now pulling like something twice that weight as waves broke over her deck and flooded through ventilation ports. At 200, the towline parted for the first time. Sumter's crew hauled the submarine close using secondary lines, resecured the main towline with reinforced splicing, and resumed course. Within an hour, conditions worsened. 8-foot swells, wind gusts to 45 knots, visibility near zero in driving rain. At 0430, 40 miles southeast of Cape Hatteras, Sumter's captain looked aft and made his assessment. The Alligator was riding dangerously low. Her bow would dip beneath each wave, then struggle to surface as the following swell rolled over her deck. Water was clearly entering the hull through ventilation ports, hatch seals, possibly through the airlock. Without crew aboard to operate ballast pumps, the submarine was slowly flooding. She was becoming progressively heavier, pulling harder on the towline with every wave. If the towline held and the submarine sank while still attached, it could pull Sumter stern down into the water. If the weight became too great, it could tear the stern mounting points from Sumter's hull. Either scenario meant Sumter herself might sink, taking 98 crew members down with the submarine they were trying to save. The captain ordered the towline cut. Axes came down, hemp fibers parted, the USS Alligator drifted astern, settling lower with each wave, and disappeared into the darkness. No search was conducted. In April 1863, the U.S. Navy had no salvage capability for a vessel resting in water, potentially hundreds of feet deep, in an area where currents could carry wreckage miles from the last known position, in the middle of an active war that demanded every available ship for blockade duties. The loss report was brief. USS Alligator lost at sea due to heavy weather. 16 months of development, $13,000 in construction costs, hundreds of hours of engineering innovation. The Navy's first submarine reduced to a single sentence. But the Alligator's influence didn't vanish with her hull. Every technical innovation she carried, the hand-crank propulsion, the compressed air reservoir, the ballast tank system, the diver lockout chamber, would reappear in subsequent submarine designs. Confederate engineers were already developing the H.L. Hunley, which would become the first submarine to sink an enemy vessel in combat. That attack would occur 9 months after the Alligator's loss. Using principles de Villeroi had proven functional. By 1900, every major naval power was developing submarine programs. By 1918, submarines were decisive weapons in global warfare. The progression from Alligator to U-boat to nuclear submarine follows a direct technical lineage, each innovation built on foundations laid in that Philadelphia shipyard in 1861. Searches for the wreck continue. In 2001, NOAA initiated a multi-year survey of the seafloor off Cape Hatteras, using side-scan sonar to map the ocean bottom in the area where Sumter's captain reported cutting the towline. They found 17 previously unknown shipwrecks. None matched the Alligator's dimensions. The problem is probability. A submarine settling to the bottom in 1863 could have drifted miles before reaching the seafloor, depending on depth and current. She could have broken apart during descent, scattering debris across a wide area. Sediment accumulation over 160 years could have buried the wreck entirely. The search area covers roughly 400 square miles of ocean floor, much of it in depths exceeding 100 feet, in an area known for strong currents, shifting sand, and poor visibility. But searches continue, because the Alligator represents something beyond mere historical curiosity. She's physical proof that innovation often precedes the infrastructure needed to support it. De Villeroi built a functional submarine in an era when metallurgy, compressed air technology, and underwater engineering were all in their infancy. He solved problems that wouldn't be fully understood theoretically for another 50 years. He did it without computers, without advanced materials, without precedent. The 16 men who were supposed to crew her during the Charleston mission, their names are recorded in Navy archives, but their stories end before they could be tested. We don't know if the hand crank system would have worked under combat stress. We don't know if divers could have successfully attached explosives to harbor obstructions while breathing compressed air at depth in near-zero visibility. We don't know if the Alligator could have changed the course of the Charleston campaign. What we know is that she existed. The Navy's official records confirm her commissioning, her specifications, her assignments, her loss. Newspaper accounts from 1862 describe her trials. Letters from officers mention seeing her in Philadelphia. She wasn't a legend or a myth. She was a real vessel that carried real innovations into real water and proved that humans could operate beneath the surface. Somewhere off Cape Hatteras, in sand or silt or scattered across rock bottom, 47 feet of iron hull weights. The first American submarine, lost before her first combat mission, still missing, still searching, still teaching us that the boldest innovations often disappear before anyone realizes what they were worth.